Welcome to Nice and Blunt. I'm Adam Riancho, and in this video today we're ranking wide receivers and breaking down the position. In part one, I think I'm going to go about 11 players deep based on my tiered rankings. That's what I'm expecting. So I'm going to show you something. Look at this graph! This chart has the top 50 or so players. There's a few extra ranked from most points per game last season down to the fewest points per game. And then obviously there's like another 40 other players that are not included in this chart. But those data points are the most important, and those are represented in dark blue. Those dark blue dots are the main focus of this video. So dark blue is 2024 and light blue is 2023 points per game. And then there are some red and green dots, and those are much smaller sample sizes that are maybe more indicative of the truth if they are in green, and then perhaps something I don't think will replicate if it's in red. Like maybe it was with a quarterback that is no longer with that franchise this season. It's a different situation. So let's get into it. Just wanted to give you a brief legend first, and we're going to start with probably the most obvious name at the top of these rankings. It is Ja'Marr Chase of Cincinnati, and it's hard to find a flaw because his situation has not really changed from last year, where he was a dominant player, by far more points than anyone else. Not just in points per game, he had 20. The next highest was Rashee Rice in only 3 games played at 17.6. Third on this list was Chris Godwin, who only played 7 games and averaged 16.1. So really only wide receivers 4 and 5, Justin Jefferson and T. Higgins, tied at that spot, are like the next closest player, and that's almost 5 points less on a per game basis than what Ja'Marr Chase offered last season. So in total points, he actually outscored wide receiver 2 Justin Jefferson by 74 points total, and it's a massive gap between him and everybody else. So I don't see things changing for him much. The defense is still trash, Burrow's still elite, and maybe Jermaine Burton is better in year 2, but that would only change the role for Andre Yoshivas, not Ja'Marr Chase, in this offense. So he's a stud, and the floor is secure. The year prior was kind of a worst case scenario. He still averaged 13.2 points per game, which was good for 17th on this list last year. But Joe Burrow missed half the season. Last year is much different, probably what is more likely to happen than the year prior in 2023. But I will mention one thing before we move off of Ja'Marr Chase. You would think that when T. Higgins misses time, Ja'Marr Chase's numbers go up. In fact, it's the opposite. In the 5 games played without T. Higgins last year, Ja'Marr Chase only averaged 14.7 points per game, and that would have been tied with Nico Collins for wide receiver 7 on this list. So maybe he's not as safe as like a locked-in wide receiver 1. I still trust him to have the highest floor of any player. I'm not expecting him to get hurt, and we're kind of operating that every player will optimistically stay healthy when it comes to these rankings. In the offseason, we're not going to predict injury that hasn't happened yet. So Ja'Marr Chase at number 1, I think in a tier of his own because he's so much higher than anyone else on this list. But the next tier, wide receivers 2 through 4, are actually, I think, really close together. And at first I thought it was just 2 players, but I do have CeeDee Lamb ranked at number 2, then Justin Jefferson at number 3, and Puka Nacua at number 4. So let's get to Puka in a sec. Let's start with CeeDee Lamb. The reason why I'm ranking him 1 spot above Justin Jefferson is really just the quarterback trust. I have more confidence in Dak Prescott than I do J.J. McCarthy. It's possible that Kevin O'Connell has an elite rookie year lined up for JJ, but I haven't seen it. And we've mentioned on the live stream, we've made fun of him. It is the truth. He has won a game in college with only 60 passing yards in that spot. So it's not like he was asked to completely carry his team at Michigan. They had an excellent O-line, a great run game, and when he needed to, he was excellent on third down. So he's possibly as advertised, but if it wasn't such a great situation, I don't think I'd have as much confidence in J.J. McCarthy if, let's say, he got drafted by the Bears and him and Caleb Williams swap spots. So I don't trust J.J. McCarthy as much as Dak Prescott. That's why I'm putting Lamb above Jefferson. But last year, Jefferson did stay healthy and did have a full 17 games where he did average 15.6 points. That was good for 4th on this list, but really it's wide receiver 2. Rashee Rice and Chris Godwin kind of don't count given they neither played more than 7 games apiece. So really Jefferson was wide receiver 2, and in 17 games played, he did average 15.6. And that is the exact same amount of points that CeeDee Lamb put up last year in 7 games played with Dak Prescott. CeeDee Lamb did miss the last 2 games of the season, but his 8 other weeks were with Cooper Rush, and his stats did diminish with the change in quarterback. So Dak is going to be healthy. I think Lamb is going to be just as good as last year. And even though he's missing Mike McCarthy, I think Brian Schottenheimer can still get that offense going. Their defense, I don't think, is going to be that dominant this year either. So Lamb will definitely get the ball. I don't think Pickens is a massive threat to his target share. So I do have Lamb one spot above Justin Jefferson, and both of them did take a dip in production from the year prior. But if we look at 2023, CeeDee Lamb was wide receiver 2, averaging 19.8 points per game. Meanwhile, Justin Jefferson would have been wide receiver 3, averaging 17.1 points per game. So if you go back 2 years, Lamb was better on a per game basis. I'm willing to bet that happens again because the quarterback situation is a little bit better. But it's splitting hairs. If you want to put JJ above Lamb, I wouldn't fault you for it at all. But at number 4 is probably the more interesting ranking of this tier. I do think Puka has earned it because last year he was not fully healthy. He did miss 6 total games, and in 3 of them, he was active but only averaged 41% of the snap share, whether he got hurt mid-game or was just recovering from injury and didn't play a full bevy of snaps. I think you can throw those 3 games out. They were atrocious, and I do want to acknowledge them. He averaged only 7.5 points per game, didn't score a single touchdown, and only had 4 catches for 55 yards on average in those 3 weeks. That was wide receiver 58 on a points per game basis. So that is the worst case scenario, but it relies on injury in order to happen. Otherwise, we've seen Puka Nacua play at an elite level. In his rookie season, he played all 17 games and did average 13.9 points per game. He set a bunch of records as a rookie wide receiver. And last year, in all of his games, in all 11, he was wide receiver 6, averaging 15.2 points per game. So just barely behind Justin Jefferson and a full point above CeeDee Lamb, who averaged 14.1. But if we isolate the 8 weeks when Puka was fully healthy, he was averaging 80% of the snaps, not 41. That's where he really showcased his true ceiling. He averaged 18.1 points per game in those 8 full healthy games at 80% of the snap share. So that's what I would expect. If anything, his snap share is going to be closer to 95% if fully healthy this season. And that ceiling is better than what we saw from Jefferson, from almost any other player other than Jamar Chase last season. So I really trust Puka. They did replace Cooper Kupp with Devontae Adams, who I think is a somewhat legit threat, but I expect Adams to be a focal point in the red zone. And if you look at Puka's stats, you can argue his touchdown numbers will be increasing. On his career, he only averages about a 35% touchdown rate. The odds are pretty slim. He's only scored 10 total touchdowns in 28 career games. And if we look at that 8-game sample size that I mentioned when he was elite, his touchdown rate did climb to 50%. And usually stud wide receivers like this that can put up over 100 yards per game and get double-digit targets are going to score more than just 5 touchdowns in a season. So I think Puka could absolutely crush. I think there's an argument to be made he should be the wide receiver 1 overall this year, assuming Jamar Chase isn't going to repeat. And I kind of want to rank him above Lamb and Jefferson. He has the best quarterback of this group. The only quarterback better in a higher ranked player would be Jamar Chase and Joe Burrow. So that is why I'm going to give Puka the edge here in the same tier as CeeDee Lamb and Justin Jefferson. I think he has the same potential. I think the floor is locked in. They're all giving you at least 15 points, but one of them could really pop, and it could easily be Puka Nacua with Stafford and Sean McVay pulling the strings in that offense. So love Puka. Really excited about the Rams passing game in general this season. But next, I think we're dropping down a tier. Wide receivers 5 through 8. I do think are kind of interchangeable. They all have the same amount of upside. They could all finish at this spot, but I also think they all have the same high floor where they're not going to finish outside the top 12, assuming they stay healthy. I really can't envision a scenario where any of these players bust, but I am going to give the tiebreakers in this tier to age and availability. I do think that is an important factor. If you're going to draft them in round 1, you would ideally not like them to spend a quarter or more of the season on your bench, and you have to fill them in with a waiver wire guy because they're unavailable. So that is why I rank Malik Nabers at 5th here. He turns 22 in a month or so. He's pretty much locked in to an elite target share. He was the number 1 receiver in targets per game last season, an average of 11.3 per game. And although he did miss 2 games to a concussion, he did still finish as wide receiver 7 in total points last year. He was wide receiver 9 on this points per game list, averaging 14.5 per contest. And his numbers actually went up when Daniel Jones was not on the field. His 8 games played with Daniel Jones, while he did get more targets, he was less efficient and only averaged 13.6 points per game in the first half of the year. But in week 9, the Giants did have a bye, and they did part ways with Daniel Jones. They went with other quarterbacks the rest of the way, most notably Drew Lock, and Nabers' stats did go up in those final 7 weeks. He averaged 15.4 points per game with 85 yards per week and 4 touchdowns in that sample size. So his touchdowns went up, his efficiency went up, even though his targets went down. He was better with a different quarterback than Daniel Jones, which will be the case this season. I think he's getting an upgrade regardless of who gets the starts in the Giants offense, whether it's Russell Wilson, I think in the first several weeks, then maybe Jackson Dart for the rest of the season. If there is a point in time when he ever gets Jameis Winston under center, you know for a fact he's getting like almost 20 targets in that game, and they're all 30 yards downfield. So I am really excited about Nabers from a ceiling standpoint, but from a floor standpoint, he had 170 targets last year and still missed 2 games. He was on pace for 190 had he played a full season. So he could eclipse 200 if he does stay healthy this season. I expect a added boost in production in his second year of his career. I think he's going to be even better than he was last season. So I was kind of down on Nabers last year. I was worried about the touchdown production. I was not worried about the target share, and he actually scored more touchdowns than I anticipated. He was better than advertised. So Malik Nabers, I think, is locked into the top 10 in a worst case scenario, and best case scenario, I think in full PPR, you could argue for him as wide receiver 1, because you know the target share will be probably the highest of any player in the NFL. So I'm going to trust that. I think it's a bust-proof pick, and if Jackson Dart is actually pretty good, we might get an elite ceiling available where Nabers scores double-digit touchdowns. It is possible, although I probably am not going to bet on it. But at number 6, I'm going to rank the 4th LSU wide receiver in my top 6. I got Jamar Chase and Jefferson in the top 3. I have Nabers at 5. Let's put Brian Thomas Jr. in this category as well. Brian Thomas is still only 22 years old entering the season. He will be 23 before the year is over. But last year, he was fantastic. He was wide receiver 4 in total points on the season. He stayed fully healthy, and he played even better when Trevor Lawrence was off the field. Like most rookies, the second half of the season looks even better than the first half, and the quarterback play was much worse. So I think with Liam Cohen as the new head coach and play caller, the offense is already going to take a leap. And then with the re-addition of Trevor Lawrence, I think the deep ball passes will be more accurate and will be more successful overall. So I am a firm believer that Brian Thomas is an elite player, elite athleticism. He has 4.3 speed, and at his frame, it's hard to find that. He is an elite separator down the field. So I think he can score from anywhere. He's an absolute burner. If we look at his season last year, if we look at the games with Mac Jones, he was averaging 14.2 points per game. That would have ranked as wide receiver 11 on a points per game basis. He was wide receiver 21 with Trevor Lawrence, only averaging 12.1 points per game in the first 9. But if we want to get really, really excited, we can look at the final 4 games of the season when neither Evan Ingram nor Christian Kirk were healthy on the team. And neither of those players are back with the team this year. So they cut bait on 2 big parts of the offense. And in the 4 weeks when they were gone, Brian Thomas was a league winner. He averaged 21.4 points per game. That would have been well above Jamar Chase for wide receiver one had it been a full season, but they did bring in Travis Hunter, drafted him second overall. Maybe the target share is going to be weird with Travis Hunter, and maybe he does miss some snaps because he's also playing on defense and maybe takes a shot trying to tackle Derrick Henry or some elite running back that just trucks him. I am kind of worried about Travis Hunter's injury risk, but even if he stays healthy, I still don't think it's going to impede the progress of Brian Thomas Jr. in his career. I think expect BTJ to be even better in year two, given the entire circumstance for him did improve entering this season. So love Brian Thomas Jr., and I think he'll stay healthy. I'm going to trust those LSU receivers, my fourth in the top six. But if you want to rank these next two players above the LSU young guys, I understand. I think there's a very legitimate argument to make on that. But both of these guys are at least 3 years older. Amon-Ra St. Brown is my wide receiver 7, entering the year at 25.7 years old. And then at number 8, I do have Nico Collins, who is going to be 26 this season. So I trust Amon-Ra St. Brown to stay healthy. That's what's happened throughout his career. Last year, he also got knee surgery after the fact to, quote, clean up some stuff that was lingering during the season. So he did play through injury. That is not something you can say about Nico Collins. For the 4th straight year of his career, Nico Collins did not play a full season. He has never done that, and in 4 years, he's actually missed a full NFL season. He's missed 17 games in 4 years. So that's an average of 25% of the games missed, and if you're guaranteeing 4 are expected to be off the table this year from Nico, I would rather just have the available player in guys like Amon-Ra and the younger guys like Brian Thomas and Malik Nabers. But both of them had an elite ceiling as well. We can look to Amon-Ra. All of last year averaged 14.6 points in all 17 games, and the year prior, he averaged 17 points per game. So he was fantastic. He was the wide receiver 3 in total points, and I expect him to stay healthy. He usually plays through pain. Sometimes he might miss one, but he's not missing a quarter of the season consistently. So that's why I trust him a little bit more. Also, 2023 was better than anything Nico's put up, but Nico's been a very consistent producer the last 2 seasons as well. Last year in points per game, he was wide receiver 7, so just barely above Amon-Ra, averaging 14.7 points, 14.6, 14.7, that's splitting hairs. And then the year before that, in 15 games played, he did average 14.5 points per game, which would have been tied with Malik Nabers last season. So he's been really consistent, really productive when he's on the field with CJ Stroud. He was terrible without Stroud earlier in his career, but since then, he's been one of the best receivers in the NFL. And I think his team really needs him to have success, but his fantasy production is sometimes dependent on other players around him. Like if we look closer into last year, there were a lot of injuries in that receiving core in general. Nico got hurt just 4 weeks into the season, and in those first 4 games, all 3 receivers were on the field. Both Nico Collins, Tank Dell, and Stephon Diggs were all healthy, all 3 of them. In those 4 games, Nico had his best stretch of the year, averaged 15.9 points per game. However, he came back later when Diggs was off the field, and then at the end of the season, Tank Dell also got hurt, and neither of them lined up alongside him. In those 2 games, when he was the only receiver that they really trusted, his stats went down dramatically. He only averaged 9.9 points per game without both Tank Dell and Stephon Diggs. So when both of them were on the field, he had an extra touchdown of production that just evaporated in fantasy without those 2 guys. And they did bring in 3 receivers to replace those 2 players. They traded for Christian Kirk with a 7th round pick. They also drafted Jaden Higgins, gave him a fully guaranteed contract in round 2. And then in round 3, they also drafted Jalen Noel, also out of Iowa State. He was a teammate of Jaden Higgins last season. So that is a big investment in the wide receiver depth, but it's still Nico's team, and he's still the alpha in this offense. So with 3 guys to work with, as opposed to just 2 this season, I expect at least one of them to stay healthy all year, and he will get a little bit of a break from the defensive attention that likes to bracket and double team him as much as possible. He is a nightmare to guard, and I understand ranking him at the top of this tier as wide receiver 5, but because of those injured games and all the time that he's missed, I think he's a bit of a riskier investment. You also need someone off the waiver wire, more likely with Nico, when he's on your team. I don't think you need that at all with Amon-Ra, Brian Thomas, and Malik Nabers. So that's my rankings in this tier 5 through 8, kind of interchangeable, but my preference is Nabers because of all the volume, Brian Thomas because of a better situation, and I think an even better ceiling this year. And then at 7, the consistent high-end floor of Amon-Ra St. Brown, always available. And then at number 8, the elite ceiling of Nico Collins, but the oldest in this group and the most injury prone of the bunch. So all of these players I think are elite wide receiver 1s. I'd be very happy with any of them on my team, and I'd draft all of them in the first round. Next up, I think these are more second round picks. They're still really good. If they're your wide receiver 2, if you have a pair in the top 11, I think you're loaded, probably going to win your league at that position at least. But if they're your wide receiver 1, I still think you have phenomenal depth and a great stud at the top. So this tier is 3 players deep, and at number 9, I do have Drake London of the Atlanta Falcons, who took a massive leap forward last year when they made an upgrade at quarterback. In 2023, when Desmond Ridder was the quarterback and Arthur Smith was calling plays, Drake London was wide receiver 52 in points per game. He averaged only 8.6 points per game and only had 2 touchdowns on the season. So that was terrible, but last year in 2024, he increased that number by a full 5 points per game up to 13.6, which did rank as wide receiver 15 in points per game. He played all 17 games and did score more than 8 touchdowns in 2024. So he made a big leap forward. His targets jumped to over 9 per game. He averaged about 75 yards per game on 6 catches. I expect that number to increase because there's an upgrade at quarterback. Yet again, I do think Michael Penix is better than what we have with Kirk Cousins at this stage of his career. Post Achilles with a midseason elbow injury, I think Michael Penix is going to be far better, especially deep down the field. Penix was elite in college. He had one of the best passing games of all of college football right before he declared for the draft. He made the national championship game, and 2 of his 3 stud receivers have really flopped in their first year in the NFL. Rome Odunze looked like a shell of himself compared to what he looked like in college with Michael Penix. And same applied with Jalen Polk. Jalen Polk was trash for the Patriots last year. Jalen McMillan was okay, but only once he came back from injury and Chris Godwin was off the field. But Baker Mayfield may have played a part in that development as well. So London, I think, will be one of the best players Michael Penix has ever thrown the ball to, and we have seen him really elevate his game in the 3 games with Penix last season. This is a very small sample size, and I actually don't trust it at all because Darnell Mooney was both injured and also unavailable in all 3 of these games. He missed week 18 entirely, and that's when London put up his best stat line of his career. In week 18, without Darnell Mooney on the field at all, he had 18 targets, 10 catches, 187 yards, and scored 2 touchdowns, the only 2 touchdowns of this 3-game sample size. He scored 36 fantasy points in half PPR in week 18, and that's why in the 3 total games with Michael Penix, averaged 19.4 points per game. It would look a lot different if not for that game with 36 fantasy points. So if you throw it out, the numbers don't really change at all for Drake London, but I am willing to consider that maybe the ceiling is going to be higher just because the quarterback play is going to be better straight up compared to an injured Kirk Cousins. So I'm really optimistic for that, but we haven't seen London perform at that like top 5 level that you can point to with all the other players I've already mentioned, and that's why I do think he's in a tier below the top 8, but still a really good player. He was the wide receiver 5 in total points last season, thanks to staying fully healthy. He did put up 231 fantasy points in half PPR last year, and that was good for 13.6 on a points per game basis. So really safe floor with him. I can't really think of a single red flag. I think he'll stay healthy as he has all throughout his career already, and the quarterback play should really elevate him as a weekly top 10 play. Next up, I got A.J. Brown, who's been a staple in your lineup ever since he got drafted basically. The last 2 years in Philadelphia have actually been extremely consistent on a points per game basis for A.J. Brown. In 2023, he averaged 14.1 points per game. He played all 17 games. And then last year, although he did miss 4 weeks, he only played in 13 games. In 2024, he also averaged exactly 14.1 points per game total. So really consistent numbers with Jalen Hurts and the Eagles, but maybe that changes given Kellen Moore is not going to be the play caller this year. But I still expect a really high-end output from A.J. Brown. He's a touchdown machine. Games where A.J. Brown saw 7 or more targets, he was the wide receiver 2, averaging 17.1 fantasy points per game in those weeks. However, when he was getting 6 targets or fewer, that number dropped significantly. It was under 10 points per game, and that's a big difference. Definitely not the elite receiver you expect. So occasionally he does disappear, but most of the time you are getting an elite ceiling that could put up 25, 30 points in a given week. Sometimes A.J. Brown just dominates. So happy to have him as my wide receiver 1 if that's how it shakes out. If I wait to round 2 and he's my guy at the top of ADP, not going to panic, still going to feel good. He is much better, though, as a wide receiver 2 on your roster. I'd love if he was my second receiver. I think my team would be stacked in that scenario. But I will mention one last thing before moving on. His numbers did kind of dip down if you gave him exact scenario we are expecting. In 9 of those 13 games last season, both Jalen Hurts and Devontae Smith were both healthy. His stats do come down a little bit. He averaged 13.7 points per game, and the touchdown rate did kind of decrease just a little bit. But his overall volume didn't change. He put up the same efficiency other than touchdowns, and expect somewhere between 13.5 and 14 points from A.J. Brown in points per game again this season. I don't expect anything to change unless he gets hurt, and that's not something we're predicting with anyone. So gonna stay optimistic, gonna keep him top 10. He's been top 12 the last 2 years. Lastly, in this video though, Ladd McConkey is my wide receiver 11. It's not just my Chargers bias that is talking. While yeah, I'm excited for Ladd McConkey, I was kind of expecting him to be lower ranked entering the year because of all the extra target competition that is coming in to the Chargers offense. They drafted Trey Harris and then they signed Mike Williams, but Mike Williams did just retire. He's not going to play for them at all this year. And then Trey Harris did finally sign his contract. He was a holdout up until a few days ago. So there were signs that maybe Ladd McConkey might not be as dominant this year, but it's looking like he's going to have the same role as last season, and Justin Herbert's going to trust him even more than he already did. And last year, Ladd McConkey was a top 20 wide receiver overall. He was wide receiver 13 in total points. He did stay healthy. He only missed 1 week of the season. He was wide receiver 18 in points per game. He averaged 12.4 on a points per game basis. But just like other rookies that we've mentioned, there's the first half of the year that's usually not as good as the second half of the season. And this time there's extra reasons for that. Justin Herbert was not fully healthy to start last year. He barely played in training camp. He had an ankle injury. I believe it was a Lisfranc foot injury. And then in week 4, he was taken off the field at halftime because that injury was aggravated and they wanted him healthy going into the bye. So in week 6 and 7, I think he may have still been recovering, and I'm willing to throw out those first 6 games total from the Chargers. Just because Herbert was not 100% healthy, I'm willing to say they don't fully count in the Ladd McConkey evaluation. Let's instead look at the final 10 games of last year for Ladd, weeks 8 through 18, when Herbert was fully healthy. Ladd was clearly an elite option in fantasy. He averaged 14.7 points per game. That would have been tied with Nico Collins for wide receiver 7 in points per game. So he was fantastic. He averaged 7.3 targets, 5.8 catches, 88 yards per game, and did score 5 touchdowns in that 10 game sample size. So a 50% touchdown rate that could increase. He was actually outscored in the touchdown department last year by Quentin Johnston, king of Dropsville. So I think Ladd has a higher ceiling he could still hit, but if last year's numbers repeat in those final 10 games, I would be ranking him too low at wide receiver 11. He does have top 7 potential. You could argue he should be in the same tier as Nico Collins, but I have him 3 spots behind Nico Collins. Let's pump the brakes a little bit. He was still wide receiver 18 overall in points per game played. So that's what I'm expecting in a worst case scenario, a top 16 option. He could be several spots higher on this list, and it would be justified. So that is my top 11, the top 4 tiers of my wide receiver rankings. Just a reminder here on the screen how it went. We have Jamar Chase in a tier of his own just because he was so dominant last season. Then I have CeeDee Lamb, Justin Jefferson, and Puka Nacua in tier 2. I think they can all finish as the wide receiver 1 if things break in their direction. But at worst, I think they're top 6 receivers at the position when healthy. Then wide receivers 5 through 8, I think are all locked into the top 10 and could all finish as a top 5 play. But based on age and durability, I'm going to put Malik Nabers at 5, Brian Thomas Jr. at 6, Amon-Ra at 7, and the oldest and most injury prone of the group, Nico Collins, at number 8. He may have the highest ceiling, though, of this foursome. Then at 9 through 11 in tier 4, I have Drake London, AJ Brown, and Lad McConkey. And I think those are the best receivers, the most trustworthy names you can draft in fantasy this year. These rankings are intended for half PPR, but in full PPR, I actually wouldn't change any of these rankings at the top. Maybe the rest of the way, starting with wide receiver 12, but that's for another video. I'll see you in part 2 when we'll break that down. That's it for me. My name is Adam Mariancho. Hope you enjoyed. Hit that like button if you did, and I'll see you next time. Thank you for watching. Nice and blunt.